Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to IISS. My name is Nigel Inkster. I'm the Director for Transnational Threats and Political Risk here, and it's a great pleasure for me to host this book launch for my colleague, Virginia Kamali, our Research Fellow for Security and Development, who has, in her spare time, run up this interesting little publication, Boko Haram, Nigeria's Islamist Insurgency, which I'm confident you all have bought or are about to buy. Copies are, as I think you may have noticed, available on the table outside. The format for this is that Virginia and I will just have a moderated conversation with Virginia, ask her some questions, and if during the course of that anybody wants to become involved in part of the discussion, they're welcome to put their hand up and get my attention. But once we've finished our bilateral conversation, we will leave time for more direct question and answer participation from the audience. And for those of you who stay the course, as an incentive, there will be a glass of wine at the end, which you are of course welcome to stay for. Note that the wine comes at the end, not the beginning, for obvious reasons of strategic calculation. Virginia, I'd like to start by asking you perhaps to say something about how you came to have an interest in the security problems of sub-Saharan Africa in the first place. What was it that drew your interest and attention to this area?
Well, I've always been interested in the activities of non-state armed groups, being them extremists, insurgents, organized criminals. And a few years back, we got involved in a project looking at the strategic implications of transnational organized crime. And we decided to look at West Africa as a key case study. And that's how really I started spending more time looking into African, sub-Saharan African security issues. And certainly the developments in Nigeria in particular really lent themselves quite well to my professional interest. In Nigeria you can find a wide array of armed groups, being them criminals, you have some insurgents, you have incidents of extremism and terrorism, you have cults and gangs of various denominations. And what really attracted me to it is the variety of the groups and the fact that some of these groups are very hybrid in nature. So they employ a wide array of tactics, and and they create enormous challenges. So I think from an intellectual point of view, it's very attractive. Nigeria is a very attractive country for people like us who work on security and development issues.
Okay. So, thank you. So can you now perhaps move on and say something about how you went about this project, and in particular, because I know that you did some field research. Tell us something about that experience, how that was, and were there any particular challenges associated with the field research aspect of the book?
Well, when I started working on Boko Haram a few years ago, at the time it was quite hard to find well-researched and thorough, in-depth reports, let alone books on the subject. So I guess that was one of the first challenges, getting hold of the information. Of course, there's plenty of media reports, but of course you have always to be careful and trying to verify the accuracy of those media reports coming from within Nigeria, but also internationally. So maybe I would say the first challenge was the lack of available information, reliable information. And then, of course, it was very important for me, as you mentioned, to carry out some field research to really get a feel for myself of the situation on the ground, and trying to travel as far north in the country was feasible. in order to really get a better understanding of the situation. So I was very grateful I had the opportunity to do so. And traveling to Kano State in the north of Nigeria was really an eye-opener for me. And having the opportunity to talk not only with government officials, military officials, human rights advocates, but just talking to the average Nigerians, people who have survived Boko Haram attacks, people who were recalling their families being killed or their homes being destroyed, people being subject to endless checkpoints and sometimes being harassed by the security forces. It was very important for me to hear those stories and to put them in these in the picture, because I think very often we or I make the mistake of looking at the strategic picture and forgetting the human side. And doing the field research really allowed me to explore that part of the conflict.
Okay, thanks very much. So perhaps now we can turn to Boko Haram itself. Can you tell us something about what this organization, this movement, this phenomenon actually is? Is it an insurgency? Is it criminal enterprise? Is it a genuinely religious group? Is it driven more by political considerations? What can you tell us about the leadership of the group, and what can you say about the sort of people who join it, become members of
Sure.
it?
Well, first of all, I'll give you my own definition of what Boko Haram is, and that's what I concluded after doing my research. For me, Boko Haram is a violent Islamist insurgency that uses terrorist tactics such as suicide attacks, but also engages in criminal activities as a way of raising funds. So here already you have highlighted the fact that there are different components that can be identified within Boko Haram. And as we know from other theaters, other conflicts, insurgencies are rarely monolithic, and you can see many different elements within groups, within insurgencies, and therefore also require approaches to be comprehensive. Well, Boko Haram has changed a lot since the time it first emerged in the early 2000s until now. When the group first emerged, and there are different accounts of how it really emerged, but for the sake of simplicity, we go back to the early 2000s in Yobe State. And Boko Haram was really an isolated community headed by a very charismatic and wealthy preacher, Mohammed Yusuf, who had managed, through his charismatic preaching, but also through the fact that he was a very wealthy man and was able to offer money to young unemployed people coming not only from northern Nigeria, but also from neighboring Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, to attract a large number of followers. And already I'm hinting at the fact that many of the members are possibly unemployed, usually young men who decide to join the group. But let's not forget that especially at the beginning of Boko Haram, many wealthy men and educated children of the middle class also join the movement. So it's not always poverty that drives this sort of groups. And although during the first few years Boko Haram was a fairly non-violent organization, we can see over time this changing. And a major turning point was in 2009 when, following skirmishes with the security forces, there was a 4-day battle in Maiduguri, which is the key city in Borno State in northeast of Nigeria, which led to the killing of about 800 members and the extrajudicial killing of Mohammed Yusuf. And this really was a turning point for the group. For one reason is because the group at this point was heavily, of course, damaged, and it was forced to go underground, but also because it created this desire to seek revenge among the remaining members, and is a desire that still remains with the group to an extent today. So this was a key phase, and a year later, when the group reemerged, Abu Bakr Shekau, the current leader, was now leading the group. And really this was a much more violent group that we were looking at, a group that really tried hard to establish links with more sophisticated extremists such as Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. And over time, we started to adopt also new tactics. And 2001 marked the first time in the history of Nigeria that a suicide attack was carried out. And this really was a huge shock for the security forces, who would have sworn that such an attack could never have happened in the country. Over time, we have seen Boko Haram also branching its tentacles into neighboring countries. As I mentioned earlier, from the early days, the group had attracted members from neighboring countries, but it has also started to use the borderlands with Niger and Chad and Cameroon to as safe havens, to seek refuge for the Nigerian security forces, to raise funds, to recruit people. And this is what basically in the book I describe as the regionalization of Boko Haram. And for the most part, I think Boko Haram strategy has been a fairly smart one. They try to keep a low profile in those countries without carrying out attacks there, so that these areas could truly be safe havens, and they would not, and the members would not be targeted by the local security forces. Clearly, this has changed quite a bit over the past 6 months, when we've seen attacks and kidnappings taking place in neighboring countries, and really had required a greater military input by those neighbors in the fight against Boko Haram. Of course, a major development was the Pledge of Allegiance to the Islamic State, which was then accepted by Baghdadi, the leader of the Islamic State. And there is so much debate on the meaning of this Pledge of Allegiance, and whether this is a publicity stunt or whether there is more substance to it. Clearly, since the beginning of this year in particular, if we look at Boko Haram media presence, we can see, first of all, they now have a Twitter account. They've released videos that are much more sophisticated and sometimes have been uploaded using the same media used by the Islamic State. And so we can, and also in their own logo and flag, we see something reminiscent of Islamic State's own flag. So we can see some interaction there for sure, but still remain to be seen whether this alliance is going to make a massive difference on the ground.
Okay, thank you very much. So, what can you tell us about the response of, firstly, the Nigerian government and the Nigerian security forces to this phenomenon, and maybe, in addition, something about the reactions of the international community more broadly, particularly following the 2014 Chibok kidnapping?
Sure. Well, the Nigerian prime approach has been a military one, a repressive approach to eliminate the movement. And I mentioned earlier this big battle in Maiduguri in 2009. Over time, I think the military approach has been the one driving Nigeria's strategy, and is the one that is often being criticized by the international media for human rights violations perpetrated by the Nigerian military. However, although perhaps underreported, other initiatives have been developed by the Nigerian governments that involved a more comprehensive approach to countering Boko Haram, that involved de-radicalization and counter-radicalization initiatives. They involve a strategic communications plan as well. Of course, these plans are all very challenging when it comes to implementation. For instance, if we are talking about de-radicalization in prisons for those members that have been incarcerated, and if you want to embark in de-radicalization, you need to recruit people who are capable of delivering these projects, and that in itself is a very challenging thing to do, as I was being told when I was visiting the person who is actually in charge of designing these programs. I think quite over the past few months, quite a lot of success has been made. Last year, the Boko Haram had captured many Nigerian northeastern cities and towns. Now the government forces have managed to recapture those towns and cities and really have forced Boko Haram to hide in the Sambisa forest. Controversially, however, starting at the beginning of this year, the involvement of mercenaries, of private security contractors, has become part of the mix. And I think they're also part of the success that has been registered over recent months, which of course raises a number of questions in itself, because the use of private military security is a very sensitive issue. And many of these men come from South Africa, and the South African government have been, for instance, very eager to distance itself from this from the use of South African military forces. If we look at beyond Nigeria, neighboring countries have been part of a multinational joint task force in the Lake Chad Basin region for some time. This initiative predates the Boko Haram crisis, and there are now involved in a specifically in an operation that is specifically targeted against Boko Haram. And I think the intervention of particularly Chadian and Cameroonian forces really has made a difference. And there are, of course, talks for an African Union force that's awaiting approval by the UN Security Council.
Okay, and have major Western countries been able to play any significant role in the efforts to roll back Boko Haram?
Yeah, well, Nigeria has some very important, some key partners abroad, namely with this country, the United Kingdom, for obvious historical reasons. The ties are pretty strong, and Nigerians make up also the largest African diaspora community in this country. And also, of course, the United States. The United States has also been involved for a number of years in providing training and military supplies and also funding. There has been a cooperation in the aftermath of the Chibok girls incidents, when the incident that led to the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, with a number of countries, and not just the UK and the US, but many others, including China, Canada, Israel, France, have all pledged to support the Nigerian government. Most of these pledges have resulted, however, but has been fairly limited to the sharing of satellite imagery, the sending of military advisors, and the sharing of intelligence when that is possible. And I would add a little caveat here, because I think the sharing of intelligence has really been a sticky point in all these relationships, because both in the case of the US and the UK, this cooperation had to be slowed down or even stopped altogether at various points over history, because of human rights violations on the Nigerian part that have prompted their British or American counterparts to stop their interaction.
Okay, fine, thank you. Boko Haram has been portrayed, I think, as predominantly a function of the ethnic and religious divide in Nigeria between north and south, with Boko Haram coming almost exclusively from and presenting most of the security problems in the north of the country. We've had a recent election in Nigeria which has returned as president somebody from the north of the country, and also with a military and security force background. What do you think, if anything, we can expect to change as a result of this?
Yeah. Well, President-elect Buhari is going to have to deal with a broad array of challenges, not just in security terms, but also in political and in economic terms. What I think is fair to expect is that, unlike previous years, the northern part of Nigeria is less likely to be neglected or forgotten, especially because, as you mentioned, General Buhari is a northerner. He's from Katsina State. He's himself Muslim, and he's promised during his election campaign not to leave any state behind. I think we are going to see a continuation of a military approach He has promised to make sure that Boko Haram will feel the full force of the Nigerian military. And I think it is also very important to keep up the military effort, to keep on exerting pressure on Boko Haram. And I think complacency should be avoided, even in the face of this, positive past few weeks. I think, however, it's very important that not only a military approach is adopted to deal with this challenge, and already there are a number of initiatives that we hope will be developed that would encourage the improvement of infrastructures and investment in northeastern part of Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, maybe I can just ask you to speculate about what you think the future of Boko Haram will be, in this new arrangement. They appear to be on the defensive at the moment. They appear to be in hiding. Do you think that state of affairs will continue? Do you think that we will see them back again? What would you expect to happen next?
Well, I think we can say that Boko Haram has been fairly significantly degraded, but it's not a spent force. And so I think it's too soon to say that this war has been won. And I think we are likely to see a continuation of violence of some sort for some time. And even if the military approach brings the actual insurgency campaign to an end, I think we are likely to see a continuation of terrorist attacks, especially in urban settlements across northern Nigeria. And also one thing that we should not forget is that although the Boko Haram's heart of operation is in the northern part or northeastern part of the country, the group does have cells and operatives spread across several states. So even if the main, the core becomes severely degraded, it doesn't mean that those individual or smaller groups or factions won't decide to continue with the violence. I think that there is also the risk that if the insurgents are pushed into more remote areas and perhaps more into areas that are less under the government control in neighboring countries, perhaps in Niger or Chad, there is the risk that they might be able to regroup there and then come back again once they've got their strength back.
Okay, so you think there's possibly enough material there for a second volume in due course?
Yeah, Boko Haram 2.0.
Yeah. Okay, well, Virginia, thank you very much. That's covered a lot of ground, but I've deliberately left out quite a lot in my questions in the hope that I can invite you now to take part in this conversation. So, please feel free to do so. Ask any questions, make any points you care to do. Can I ask only that when you do so, you tell us who you are? The gentleman right at the back there. Could you also please wait for the microphone? Thank you.
James Roberts from the Tablet Catholic paper. I've been curious since this started as to who the main financial backers are of Boko Haram. Obviously they get money from inside Nigeria, but in terms of international backing, which countries do you think possibly help to finance them?
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting question, and Boko Haram has sought funds through different streams, criminal activities within Nigeria, like extortions and bank robberies, the kidnapping of both Nigerians, wealthy Nigerians, and also foreigners, kidnapped for ransoms. They've in the past received, talking about international connections, they've in the past received funding and support, for instance, from Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and certainly we have seen how media has also been exploited. There is an interesting report by JABA, which is the ECOWAS agency responsible for investigation into money laundering and financial crime, that points out how it's possible that Boko Haram may use online scam also to raise funds by preying on gullible Westerners, basically. But I mean, I would actually be interested in seeing more evidence on that. There were, during earlier phases of Boko Haram, there were reports according to which some members had actually traveled abroad, and places such as Pakistan or Afghanistan had been named as places where some funds could have been raised, and also where some training could have been obtained, especially in bomb making, so that people would then go back to Nigeria and train even more bomb makers. Over time, there have been a number also of speculations involving some Islamic charities from around the world, and the name Saudi Arabia has also been mentioned in a number of occasions, as well, this is often the case in these discussions. But it's very hard to find hard evidence really pointing into that directions. One interesting aspect also of the funding chapter is that, especially, I would say until maybe 2010 or so, there were also a number of wealthy northern Nigerian businessmen and also politicians who have been accused of funding and supporting Boko Haram. And even earlier, I think, some funding had been received from local politicians. But this has to be seen really in the context of this practice, unfortunate practice, of around time of the elections in particular, to hire local thugs to intimidate political opponents. Of course, this all snowballed, and the problem grew into a monster that local politicians were no longer able to control. But certainly that was a key element at the beginning of Boko Haram.
Thank you very much. Yes, the gentleman also in the back row there, please, with a hand up. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi there, Folarin Kuku, Nigerian National ex-British Army. My question is really in two parts. Firstly, you mentioned that Boko Haram itself has links to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Do you think that now they're on the back foot militarily, their material, who is speculated to come from places Niger, Mali, will dry up? And as they're getting beaten more by the Nigerian forces, do you think they'll become less of a flavor of the month, you will, and return back to a local insurgency?
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting, because we saw, especially at the height of the crisis in Mali, you mentioned Mali, how Boko Haram and possibly Ansaru members. Ansaru is the key offshoot of Boko Haram, of which we know very little now. It's probably kind of almost disappeared. They were present in northern Mali and fighting alongside local Islamist groups. However, with the French-led intervention in Mali, those groups have been degraded quite considerably. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb had suffered quite a lot as a result. So I think since then it has become much harder for AQIM to actually act as a sponsor of Boko Haram. I don't think they have the resources to do so that much now. And to an extent, up until the past few months, Boko Haram didn't really have the need for this additional funding source, because of all the criminal activities they were conducting internally within Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. There's another gentleman at the back there. Could the person, somebody had their hand up.
I think it's Sophia.
Yeah, Sophia, right, sorry, yeah, okay, thank you.
I'm Sophia Patel from Kinetic. I was going to ask you about Ansaru and what you felt, whether you thought they were simply an offshoot of Boko Haram or whether it was a separate ideological organization, and what we should hope to see, if anything, from the organization in the future, or where they are now. I guess
Yes.
you answered that kind of.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I mean that's a big question mark, whether Ansaru still exists, whether we're going to see a new Ansaru in the future. I don't know. My sense of Ansaru is that this actually links in very well with the previous question, with the Malian crisis. I think when Ansaru was pushed out of Mali, the militants had to go back to Nigeria, and I think there was more of an overlap in the areas of operations of Boko Haram and Ansaru. In addition, although at first maybe this Ansaru really was a splinter group, in the sense that it was a product of a number of existing tensions in terms of ethnicity, and in terms of also redistribution of funds, and also in terms of the practices being used, for instance, it is believed that Ansaru's formation was caused by the fact that many members within Boko Haram didn't agree with the fact that Boko Haram was attacking Muslims. And so that led to a split. So it was one of the many reasons that led to this split. However, I shouldn't emphasize the word split too much, because there was still quite a lot of cooperation. And although the leaderships were separate, at the middle and lower level, we saw fighters changing hats quite frequently. And there is even speculations according to which the kidnapping of a French family in Cameroon, which I'm sure you remember a while back, was not only, which was then claimed by Boko Haram, was not only facilitated by Ansar, but was actually probably perpetrated by Ansar, and then they allowed Boko Haram to take credit for it. So I think there was still lots of cooperation and sharing of expertise and knowledge, and especially with regard to kidnapping of foreigners, which is something that Ansar seemed to have mastered way before Boko Haram did.
Okay, thank you. There's a gentleman there, just in the back there, please. Can you keep your hand up? Yep. Oh, Ben, sorry.
Ben Barry from the Institute. Virginia, is there any more to say about the extent to which Boko Haram attempted to build a state or a province? Because this is a topical subject, particularly in the light of the existence of the Islamic State's caliphate.
Indeed, yes. I'm actually writing a paper with someone who unfortunately cannot be here tonight on this whole idea of state or caliphate. Yes, I mean, Shekau, the leader of Boko Haram, declared this, the formation of an Islamic State last summer, shortly after the declaration of al-Baghdadi. And it's interesting, you know, he had, of course, he found a capital for his state, the city of Gwaza, and of course, by capturing several towns and cities, there was a sense that a part of the territory was indeed under Boko Haram control. However, if you compare al-Baghdadi's caliphate and Shekau's so-called state, you could see huge differences, especially because if you look at the Islamic State, you will see forms of governance being put in place, and of course, the Islamic State cannot exert the same level of control on all parts of the caliphate, but you can see an infrastructure, a system being put in place. What you see done by Boko Haram is killing, destructions, the burning down of entire villages and towns. So you can't see not even a rudimentary form of governance being put in place.
Okay, right, there's a gentleman there, and then 3 rows back. So, yeah, you, sir, first. Yep.
Hi, Jeff Minton. I'm in the British Army, and I'm the UK's desk officer for operations in Nigeria.
Wow.
I'm just interested, if you look at Boko Haram as an insurgency, there is not much to commend it as a successful insurgency. And therefore, I'm interested in, it's a sort of 2-part question, whether you think, or to what extent you think that failings and weaknesses in the Nigerian armed forces are as much of a part of Boko Haram's success as Boko Haram themselves. And therefore, rolling that forwards, and you've already noted that Buhari is an ex-military man and is therefore more likely to invest in the Nigerian army, whether you think that just improving the quality of the Nigerian armed forces and what they're doing at the moment in terms of regional operations will be enough, or whether they need to do more in order to successfully defeat Boko Haram in the long term.
Yeah. I think shortcomings on the part of the Nigerian forces have certainly played a part in fueling the insurgency, including by the often indiscriminate use of violence, of which we've seen many reports by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and so on and so forth. So they, in a way, they've exacerbated this sense of marginalization felt by many people in the Northeast, which have perhaps pointed, well, not pointed people in the direction of Boko Haram, but even some people I've interviewed, they would say, well, we don't condone the violence, this is terrible, but we can kind of see their point. And I think this has been a huge shortcomings on the part of the Nigerian forces. The other big shortcoming, I think, is that the magnitude of the problem has not been grasped soon enough. For too long, the problem has been dismissed as something simply affecting the northern part of the country. And for instance, I have a friend of mine who's from Lagos, and when I was telling her about my type of work, and she would say, well, yeah, but that's something for the north. Well, no, actually, it does affect the whole country. And of course, it's just a sample of a friend. I'm not using this as a major, scientific, case. But I think this was quite widespread for quite a lot of time. And I think the events such as the Bring Back Our Gold campaign really helped kind of spread the concern more across the country and make people understand that it's not something just for that simply affects a small part of Nigeria. So certainly I would say that actually when I was writing the book, at some point I've actually changed the way I was structuring the book, because I stopped simply analyzing the tactical evolution of Boko Haram in isolation, but I started doing it in parallel with what the military were doing, because there are many cases of retaliation and tactics and strategies being adapted in response to one another. But having said that, I don't want people to have the impression that I have something against the Nigerian forces, because there are many very determined, professional, qualified, and courageous men and women among the Nigerian forces who are really determined to bring this crisis to an end, and their concerns, are genuine. And so I wouldn't, put, a negative label on the entire, military or security apparatus. With regard to Buhari. Yes, and not just with regard to Buhari, but more generally, I've been saying this from day one, and a simply military approach is not going to bring long-lasting stability. If you have the patience to read the book, you'll see that a big initial chunk has to do with historical background. And I wanted to do that to explain or to send the message that Boko Haram did not emerge in a vacuum. If we look at the history of the northeastern part of Nigeria, and particularly from the 1970s, we see almost a cyclical emergence of violent Islamist groups with slightly different ideologies, but they all had in common criticism towards the government, the desire to return to the true tenets of Islam, and really using the religion as a way of solving societal evils. And we've seen all these movements. The Metatsine and the riots of the 1980s were the most cited examples, but there are a number of others that I make reference to in the book that inevitably every time were dealt with militarily. So those grievances that were actually in a way driving some of these primarily religiously motivated groups were never really addressed. And so what you see almost, as I say, a cycle, groups go underground following a military repression, and then a few years later a new one emerges with a slightly different name, slightly different ideology, but with lots of things in common with their predecessors. So I think for as long as we continue only with a military approach, we are not going to see long-lasting solutions. But as I mentioned, sorry, I'm just going on a bit too long, but I'm quite passionate about all the stuff beyond the military approach, and there are plans to do that, and it's not just about economic rejuvenation, but it's also, I think, improvement of the educational system, and also making sure that it's not just the system being improved, but also the infrastructure, because one of the big symptoms of the insurgency is there are thousands of children who are missing out on their education. Not just the ones who've been kidnapped, sadly, but also the ones who cannot go to schools for fear of being killed or because their schools have been destroyed. So we need to make sure that some schools are built, and there was already an initiative called the Safe Schools Initiative. But as there is someone here, a friend from the Nigerian High Commission, who would testify, these projects are very hard to to implement, but certainly should be at the core of a comprehensive approach that goes well beyond security and military tactics and strategies.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman in the third row there, you've been very patient. Yes, in the blue shirt, yes. Thank you.
My name is David Otto. I'm a counterterrorism expert specialized in Sub-Saharan Africa. One of the things which you've rightly mentioned is the absence of a comprehensive prevent program in Nigeria at the moment. And not just Nigeria, we're talking about Niger, Cameroon, Chad, and the other areas. But the key issue which we're facing now is the influx of militants who are coming through to Niger, Chad, going through to Sudan, boarding the boats now coming through to Italy. We have about 60,000 militants, 60,000 immigrants coming in through that area. How do we make sure that we do not let some of these militants into the UK? Because what is happening now is it is alleged that the Italian government is overwhelmed by the numbers of these immigrants coming in, and what they're doing is, they're not taking fingerprints. So these guys are heading straight to the United Kingdom. What kind of prevent program is in place to stop the outflow of these militants from northern Nigeria, Chad, Niger, and then what kind of prevent program are we doing in the United Kingdom to ensure that the African heritage communities, which have been predominantly ignored within the prevent program, are addressed?
Thank you.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
And a very sensitive and timely one. And you might have guessed by my name, I'm Italian, and so the issue of migration is quite close to my heart. And I've witnessed byproducts of migration since I was a kid. And I have some friends here who might testify. I remember going to school and seeing loads of Nigerian illegal migrants, and unfortunately many were women forced into prostitution. Although this is not normally people who come from the northern part of Nigeria, they tend to come from the south, from Edo State in particular. Well, this issue of migration is, especially this week with these plans or draft plans being announced by the European Union, it's very timely and sensitive, and which of course, although at the European level there seems to be, at the European Union level there seems to be some agreement, we're still waiting for all the defense and foreign minister of the European member states to agree on a plan, and depending on the type of activities that will be part of the plan, there will probably be the need for a resolution by the UN Security Council. At the moment, these plans focus on targeting the trafficking routes and the traffickers, destroying boats. They don't really address the problem of the people, which I find to be a bit disappointing personally. Because yes, even if all these plans are agreed upon, implemented and are successful, I think what we can expect is yes, probably a reduction in the flux of migrants using the current routes, but unless we ensure people don't have reasons to escape from their own countries, they will always try to find alternative routes to reach safety and to reach Europe. So I think this is just would simply be a temporary measure. So how do you convince people to stay in their countries? Of course, I'm not advocating to tell them to stay in a place where there is conflict, they are persecuted, and there is extreme poverty. But I think the key role, and I know this is much easier said than done, is by the international community to help the building capacity within those states, so the people don't feel the need to come to Europe as illegal migrants.
Okay, thank you. Right, third row, Rima. Yep.
Hi, Rima Kumari Jadeja, I'm a member of the Institute. Virginia, I just wanted to talk about Boko Haram and its use of sexual violence as a weapon. They've not only used it as a weapon of war, but as a method for replenishing its stock. You just had to look at the Sambisa stronghold of Boko Haram to know that. So I was just wondering, even if Nigeria succeeds in winning the war, how does it actually win the peace? What are the social consequences of insurgency
Yeah.
with a historical long view? Thank you.
Yes. Well, that's going to be a challenge. We have heard of many cases of women who have been rescued who were pregnant or who had children fathered by some of the militants. That also creates a problem of reintegrating those women within communities. I was just reading just recently of some women who had to be sent not to their communities of origin but elsewhere to avoid stigmatization. And you can also, imagine in a region, in a country with a strict Islamic principle, a woman who had been raped or married, in inverted commas, is unlikely to find her husband. So I think there will be some serious plans that need to be devised to reintegrate women in communities and also to provide them, I would say, with psychological support. I think that would be very, very important. We, as you said, I think women and children are normally more vulnerable in conflict situations, and I think the Boko Haram insurgency is a case in point in which women and children have suffered a lot.
Yes, in the second row there. Yep, microphone's coming.
Rolly Spiller, British Army. You spoke about the use of private military companies. How has that been perceived locally? Is it seen as an admission of failure by the Nigerian government that it can't cope with its own problems and is having to buy in help, or is this seen as a pragmatic use of making a pragmatic use of its resources and getting the best result quickly? And what social problems does this cause, with evidently outside groups being seen as imposing a solution to a very complex problem?
Yes. Well, I actually don't have a full answer to your question. I'm not fully aware of the reaction that the use of mercenaries has generated within Nigeria. Maybe there is someone else in the audience who has a better sense. My personal sense is that a pragmatic approach has been used, and people are tired of the violence caused by Boko Haram, the level of destruction, and so if this is a way of containing or eliminating the violence or making significant progress, that's I guess that kind of justifies it.
Okay. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Quentin Tessat from the French Embassy. You mentioned the impact of Boko Haram on countries in the region. For a very long time, the countries in the region either refused to get involved or were not really allowed to get involved by the Nigerians. We've seen a lot of reluctancy from the Nigerians to talk to the Cameroonians, for example, for a while, up until really last year when the Nigerians came to us actually to organize a meeting with the rest of the region so that they could start to tackle this regionally. Since then, there has been some military cooperation, but not that much. And when the question of having a regional force under a UN umbrella started to emerge, we've seen the Nigerians starting to be a bit wary of that as well, and so pushing back again on regional cooperation. Do you think that the new administration would be more keen to have this sort of cooperation with the other countries?
Yes, I think it will. I think a number of foreign relations, when it comes to security matters, have been damaged quite a lot, especially during the past year and a half. And I think President-elect Buhari understands the need to rekindle those relations regionally and also with non-African partners. It is true, and you highlighted a very important point that although there is already a cooperation, is fairly limited to the areas, along the borders and the areas in the Lake Chad basin. So certainly more needs to be done in that sense, and I hope that we'll see that once President-elect Buhari takes office.
Thank you. Right. Yes, sir. Then. I'll give you a second go at the crack at the title.
I wonder if I could ask you to reflect a little bit more on the differences between Islamic State and Boko Haram. Islamic State appear to be having some success in establishing what you might call a state. It's a nightmare state, obviously, but they do have the rudiments of something that would work in that way. Boko Haram don't seem to have done that. I do remember last year they looked as if they were about to take Maiduguri, which would have been a significant advance, but that came to nothing as far as I know. I wonder if you have any ideas about why Islamic State works in their terms, and Boko Haram possibly is receding a little bit, we hope.
Yeah. Well, I guess, Islamic State also, I'm not a Middle East specialist, so in theory I should not really be commenting on Islamic State at all, but I think Islamic State has greater capabilities. It benefits from knowledge by foreign fighters coming from around the world, and yeah, exactly. So they did impose a form of governance and some forms of infrastructure that was not possible in Nigeria. But I think that itself, the fact of being capable of establishing a state of some sort, is in itself something very appealing and attractive for people from abroad. Say, well, these guys have been able to achieve what Bin Laden has been talking about forever and never been able to put in place. Boko Haram doesn't have that claim to fame. He has not been able really to attract members from beyond the region, and really by all the killing and destructions that he has caused, has really create lots of resentment and exasperation among the local population. And even the people who might have kind of supported or even not supported but kind of understood Boko Haram in the past have grown very resentful towards the groups, and perhaps less likely to provide support or safe haven for Boko Haram. And also, you're very right. Had they been able to capture Maiduguri, that probably would have been, quite a different story. They managed to encircle Maiduguri by capturing all the cities around. But having said that, they've also had a very symbolic meaning, because that used to be their stronghold. So being able to recapture it would have been a major coup. But even with capturing Maiduguri, if you think that Shekau doesn't seem to have a plan for building, infrastructure or, creating a governance system, then I still think that we would not really have seen an Islamic state, the one similar to the one we see in Iraq or Syria.
Okay, we've got one more question there. Yes. Okay, two questions, and then I think I'll close the batting because people are getting thirsty. So you, sir, first, and then in the second row.
Craig Dijon from the Royal Air Force. I'm just wondering what the importance of Abu Bakr Shekau is to Boko Haram. So if he were to be killed or captured, for instance, how much of a blow that would be to Boko Haram, and how well structured they are to cope with his loss if he were captured.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that so many times, especially because cyclically we hear reports of Shekau having been killed, and then every single time you see a video by him say, "I'm still here, I'm going strong," and so on and so forth, and trying to ridicule the Nigerian forces. But Shekau is not as charismatic as his predecessor was, but he's a very powerful man. Most Boko Haram members have never seen him or haven't seen him in years, and he doesn't communicate with people directly as a selected group of lieutenants that he sends around to pass orders on, give money, collect money, and all these sort of things. And I think the group would be shaken by his demise. Oh, sorry, you were talking about structure. Beside Shekau, there is also a Shura Council, the top leaders who are in the decision-making body of the group. But having said that, Boko Haram is also cell-based, fairly decentralized organizations. So although the death of Shekau would be a serious blow in morale terms, particularly, I'm sure there would be also some chaos, and I'm not sure whether he would be quickly replaced. But I don't think that would bring Boko Haram to an end.
Okay, so, gentleman in the second row there, and then, okay.
I shall add that Andrew Walker is a Nigerian expert, and when I was talking at the beginning of my talk about the lack of reliable reports during the beginning of my research, actually I was very fortunate to be able to find some of Andrew's writing, because he's one of the first people who wrote some sensible wrong reports on Boko Haram.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. I'm Andrew Walker. If we now looking at the world, what do you think the future involving with those regional powers? Now we're looking at. You put me off my thread with this crazy. Chad. What are their long-range and kind of short-range foreign policy goals? Are they looking to exploit this weakness in Nigerian state and its inability to deal with Boko Haram?
Yeah. So you mean Boko Haram moving on to Chad as a for?
No, I mean, now this area of the world has been weakened, and the state's ability to deal with this. I mean, are there regional powers, other regional powers, have they got any other interests? What does the world in 15, 20 years' time look like in terms of Chad's interests or
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. I feel that not enough information is coming out of Chad with regard to this. Only today they've expanded the mandate of the Chadian military operation indefinitely, without really giving many details on what this is really gonna mean on the ground. I think. Okay, let's say that there is little military progress. So we are speculating, we are looking at the future. And let's say the Boko Haram continues. Although, as I said earlier, I feel it has spread its tentacles by carrying out attacks in neighboring countries. We shouldn't too much look into this as Boko Haram becoming international and trying to expand across Africa, because the territories in which it operates in those countries, they all share ethnic and kinship links with the communities in Nigeria. So, as you know, the physical borders mean very, very little, and so I think Boko Haram, Shekau still sees those territories beyond Nigerian borders as part of the same territory, the ancient Borno-Kanem Empire and all of that. So I think even going forward, I'm not sure they would want to expand much beyond the areas in which they are currently operating. They might want to consolidate their presence, yes, but expand much beyond those, I'm not sure. And so I think if we take even a step further back out, I think the key players will still remain in those countries. However, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. So if there is another, a collapse of another country, Libyan style, or if there is another crisis, Mali style, those crises all had implications for the regions in terms of flux of weapons and militants and money. So of course that would have some other crisis in the region, in the broader region, would certainly have an impact on what's happening with Boko Haram.
Okay, Virginia, thank you very much indeed. I think that those of you who stayed the course have earned yourself a drink, and I would like to invite you to join us in having one. But before doing that, can I please ask you to join me in expressing our appreciation to Virginia for producing a very solid work of research and scholarship. Thank you.